The game of dice is the game of delusion through which man's consciousness devolves. It devolves from spirit to matter, from soul consciousness to bondage to the body. The game is very charming, and man stakes all his bodily kingdom, all his power of soul bliss in gambling with the deceitful matter-inclined senses. Now, that's not you and me, is it? I mean, you think that only a fool would do that, right? So let me read that again. But you and I are good fools? Don't worry, it's the delusion. Don't take it personal. So it's a very charming game. And we would stake all our bodily kingdom, all the power of soul bliss in gambling with the deceitful matter-inclined senses, only to be overpowered by them. For example, the pure discriminative intelligence of the soul is ousted from its reign over the bodily kingdom and sent into exile. So at this part in the Gita, it's before the battle that starts verse 1. We're going to look at verse 1 next week. We're going to look at verse 2 and 3 today, actually. It's before that where those two lines are cousins, actually, the Pandavas and the Kurus, reigned in the same kingdom. But heir to the kingdom was the eldest brother of the Pandavas. Remember him, Yudhishthira, the divine calmness. He's the one at the cervical center, the oldest brother of the Pandavas, is really up to be king of that kingdom. Not king material desire, Duryodhana, but Yudhishthira was. So Duryodhana, which represents desire at our first chakra, material desire, restless desire, lustful desire, was getting jealous of his cousin Yudhishthira and the Pandavas. And it just kept building and building and building and building and building in him. So finally he connected with his uncle, Shakuni. Shakuni represents the Sanskrit word moha, which is one of the 6 faults of the ego, which you and I will get into later, which is at the 4th chakra, which means it's attachment. The energy at our heart chakra that implodes the heart from opening up and being empowered, it deplodes it or implodes it so that the heart is fearful, jealous, possessive, and attached to delusion. It's not even a possibility to be attached to anything of the light, anything that brings comfort to the heart, anything that brings solace to your mind. It's totally delusively attached to the delusion that this outer world, the 5 senses, are someday going to give me something that will satisfy me. And until then, even if they don't, I'm still going to totally believe in them. So that's what that uncle, Shakuni, represents, the moha, or this delusion, or this fault of the ego, which is attached to the delusion.
Who were his parents?
Huh?
Where do you count? Who were his parents?
His uncle? I mean, it's the uncle. I don't know. It's in the index on the end of your book 2. You can go to Shakuni, and there's only 2 references to him in the book, right? And I have one of the readings, but he's the one that actually said to Duryodhana, material desire, that desire in us that just wants to, whatever, experience on the surface of our skins and be involved in this show of duality. He's the one that said, let's do it. Let's roll the dice. I will fix it, so there's no way the Pandavas can win. I will fix it. Because as it's one of your quotes, actually, and I believe it's the second one, that I've given you the quote from part of your reading. I think that's a part of your reading. If not, it's a quote. But it talks about how Shakuni threw the dice and by clever deceit won all from the Pandavas for Duryodhana. When the symbology of the character is understood, the meaning of the allegory cannot be mixed. Through the dice play of delusive sense temptations and material lures, the soul and its divine discriminative qualities are banished from the bodily kingdom. The consciousness of man is thereafter ruled over by the ego with its 6 faults. So the brother, the calmness, the oldest one that they all looked up to, got fooled, just like you and I can get fooled just like that, and threw the dice and lost, and then he bet some more and threw the dice and lost. They even lost their wife, Draupadi, who, remember, was because of Kunti, the mother of Arjuna, and the brothers said that the prize that they brought home, and they brought home Draupadi because Arjuna won it in a contest, won her in a contest, which also made the Duryodhana really jealous, but she was to, going to equally spread out that prize. But she represents the Kundalini, right? She represents that when our life force marries the Kundalini in the chakras, the Kundalini touches the chakras and awakens each one. It gives birth to an awakened chakra. So that's what she means. But they lost her. They lost their kingdom. And they got banished. They got exiled for 12 years. And the 13th year, they were supposed to stay in disguise. So nobody would be able to discover them. 13th year in disguise. So 13 years they were banished. So what that means is that any sense of being connected to our soul, our wisdom, pure discrimination, and in tune life with the cosmic laws, gone, banished. And that is usually represented in those early teen years, depending on the individuals, and you read about it in our readings and also in this introduction again, where the temptations from this world start to mix with the samskaras, or the tendencies that we brought over from past lives at whatever age that may be. For some of you might have been 5 years old, 6 years old. You remember some habits that you started engaged in. And so what happens is that's when you threw the dice. Because as little babies, we're pretty pure, aren't we? We're pretty much... Now remember that in the Mahabharata, the story, the Pandavas ruled happily. Peace in the kingdom, wisdom in the kingdom, compassion in the kingdom. They first rule. The soul rules, really. And even as a little baby, it's pretty pure consciousness, isn't it? But when we start to get kicked into our past tendencies and then the temptations of this life, we start rolling the dice. We get tricked. Oh, yeah, you can eat as much ice cream as you want. Okay, roll the dice. Oh, I'm sicker than a dog after that, right? And on and on. And we roll the dice and we roll the dice. And teen year, you have people in your life from high school, if some of you go to those reunions, that haven't changed a lick. Right? They're still rolling the dice and losing. They still want to get as much gusto in the outer part of life as they possibly can. So it's not that easy. They said 12 years, 13 years to be exact, and we'll give you back your portion of the kingdom. But they were lying, because they weren't willing to give up one needle width of their kingdom. And that's why the war did commence, the battle between the ego and the soul forces. So you'll also have read, or will read in today's reading, how when we have been ousted, you and I, so that there's no real sense of a soul or something that you and I can tap into that would bring us some relief from the changes of the duality and all these temptations and habits that we're creating, developing, that you realize right then and there that you've been ousted. You and I have been ousted by this delusion. And it's not so easy, as you'll see in these readings today, that, okay, I'm going to start meditating. Right? And what happens? Let me read you this quote. It's the first page, third one from the bottom. As soon as the spiritual aspirant introspects to rouse and train by meditation his soldiers of discrimination, immediate opposition is manifested by the king of all sense tendencies, material desire. Fearful of losing the mental and bodily kingdom, material desire seeks to reinforce himself by consulting his preceptor Drona, representing samskara, the impressions made on the conscious and subconscious mind by past thought and actions. So that's the actual second verse, though, 48, and it reads like this. Then King Duryodhana, after having seen the armies of the Pandavas in battle array, repaired to his preceptor Drona and spoke as follows. So that's part of your reading for today. But what this represents, as you and I realize through the school of hard knocks and the pain and suffering that we've endured by being soulless, so to speak, and being just pulling outward from our center again and again and again and coming up unsatisfied and discontent and quite frankly bored. Really bored because nothing can satisfy us. And you say, I'm going to start meditating. There's serious resistance by these guys that cunningly and deceitfully won the kingdom of the body and mind. And they are not going to let go of one little piece of happiness for you because you said, I'm going to meditate. And the very first thing that they do, and this is kind of a fun quote as well. Material desire, this is top of back of your first page of quotes. Material desire that is, so he goes to Drona. Let me tell you this. He goes to Drona. He sees that this battle is going to take place. The good guys, the soul forces, and his forces. That you know when I told you the story that he got all of Krishna's army. So he's got the numbers. But the Pandavas got Krishna. So they got the enlightened one, right? But he's still scared. So Duryodhana, he sees the two armies and he turns to, Drona represents habit. Habit. And what's very interesting about habit and the Sanskrit Drona, Dru means to melt. So when it comes to this idea of habit, what gets a little scary for me anyway, Drona implies that which remains in a melted state. Here's what's a little scary to me. A thought or physical act once performed does not cease to be, but remains in the consciousness in a more subtle or melted form as an impression of that gross expression or thought or action. So, you know, Tricia mentioned at Soul Talk on Sunday, she said, you ever get a feeling that you're being watched? And then she went on to say, but how about being taped? Like every thought, every feeling, every action on tape by the divine. On tape as an impression in your brain, whether we know it or not. So what happens then? These impressions are called samskara. You'll hear this word a lot, samskara. I'm reading now at the bottom of page 1. These impressions are called samskara. They create strong inner urges, tendencies, or propensities that influence the intelligence to repeat those thoughts and actions. Does anyone ever have those kinds of urges? Blind urges. That's why sometimes these children come back and it's the samskara that kicks in before they even are conscious. And they're performing these tendencies that have been created through repetition of thought, feeling, and action for many lives. That's called a samskara. So they create the strong inner urges, tendencies, propensities that influence the intelligence to repeat those thoughts and actions. Oft repeated, such impulses become compelling habits.